Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the wonderful, wacky world of U.S. immigration, changing minute by minute. Nancy Pelosi must be very tired today. Spent 8 hours yesterday advocating in Congress for the rights of the Dreamers. The longest, I think, filibuster in the House of Representatives. 8 hours. Because the Dreamers are not getting what's due to them, but that's one of the many topics we're going to touch on this morning. As often happens, every day, literally, there are multiple stories on U.S. immigration. This morning's New York Times has an editorial, a backward view of immigration, referring to the president's view of immigration as being very retro, very 1920s, nativistic, backward in every way. Failing to recognize the value of immigration to the U.S. And we're not necessarily talking about a political point of view here. We're talking about reality, history, etc. All of us are the descendants, I would assume, of immigrants in one form or another. My grandparents would shudder to think of what's going on today after all the hard work that they put in coming to America from Europe, and from very, very difficult surroundings, making their way in this country and achieving success and now seeing what amounts to a reversal in policy. For what reason, we really don't know. But immigrants are definitely under the microscope now and are being held really to a much higher standard than any other group in history. Brief bio, I've been in this field for a very long time, but I've got to tell you, I've never worked so hard since Election Day last year. My phone has not stopped ringing. The emails have not stopped coming. From Election Day onward, people recognized that there was going to be a dramatic shift in U.S. immigration, and that's exactly what happened. From the point of inauguration, the president initially was focused on illegal immigration south of the border. But now, as you know, the focus has shifted to legal immigration in the last few months. And we'll go into some of the aspects of that. In any event, just brief background, I've been doing this for a very long time, as I said. When we're dealing with U.S. immigration, it's one of the areas, and well, let me start by saying I do want to thank our sponsor, Mark Lawrence and Worldwide Land, and Michelle Wu for organizing this event today. Mark has been a terrific host, and I've had the privilege of lecturing before to Worldwide Land, and I really do enjoy it. I really love to share what goes on in my field with everyone out there. Worldwide Land has been great. If you haven't worked with them, you should, because they're the best. And Mark gives the best personal service around. Terrific company in every way. So again, in dealing with U.S. immigration, you know, there are many areas of law where people can dabble in and learn their way through the maze of the rules and regulations. Immigration, on the other hand, I started out parenthetically in general practice many years ago, and before I entered immigration, and I can honestly say that it was much easier doing general practice law than immigration, because immigration is the rules and regulations are so arcane and so extensive, and they change all the time, and that's what makes our field so challenging. When I started out as a single practitioner, I don't think I could do that today. The field has just become so diverse and so demanding. And that's why we have a section here about immigration being so challenging for inexperienced lawyers. You've got to really be careful, because mistakes can be very critical. A mistake can result today in a client being sent back to their home country, perhaps. We're reading about things that are going on, and we'll get into current events in a few minutes. But the system is now very unforgiving. Unfortunately, we've reached a critical mass in the last year where U.S. immigration, because of President Trump and directives given in Washington to the agency, they're not as friendly as they were before. Not that they were super friendly under Obama and Bush, but the atmosphere was somewhat better than it is today. We see constantly the challenges that are rising day to day. With an experienced lawyer in immigration, of course, we provide the guidance and the navigation of this very complex and demanding system. We see the options, we can see the various pathways that are available for foreign nationals. And that's why you've got to be very careful. I mentioned a case in point involving a lawyer who got involved in a case, DDM Hauler, back last year. This involved an H-2Bs are the temporary workers that are used around the country for farms. Mar-a-Lago uses H-2 workers, for example. And in this particular case, a deadline was missed that resulted in the application being denied. Very common scenario. Immigration, as I said, is very unforgiving. One day late, they will generally say, sorry, you're out of luck. They will generally not excuse any sort of delay anymore. We just, whereas in general law, you might be able to get a deadline excused, not in immigration anymore. One day can be critical in every situation. Now, we'll go through a few of the updates, and again, these things are changing hour by hour. I must check the news probably about 10, 12 times a day. That's how fast stories are emerging on immigration throughout the country. We see here what's going on. The McCain-Kuhn, various bills are coming out. You all are hearing about it in the news. Just the other day, bipartisan bill was introduced by Senators McCain, Republican of Arizona, and Coons, Democrat of Delaware, and they tried to introduce a bipartisan compromise because of what's going on with the current gridlock in Congress. And they proposed a bipartisan compromise on immigration, and this was just on Monday. And they presented it, and it was quickly knocked down by the executive branch. I mean, essentially, the president came out with a remark saying that our current immigration system is, quote, stupid. Meanwhile, this was a great idea. We have members of both parties trying to reach a compromise because of the emphasis on the dreamers. Now, for those of you, the term dreamers refers to people who came into the U.S. Generally before 2007. We're looking about, I would say, close to 787,000 people comprise this group. In 2012, President Obama passed what was called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, which is now loosely referred to as the DREAM Act. Allowed unauthorized foreign nationals below the age of 31 who came to the U.S. to come to essentially get work permission and the ability to stay in the U.S. And so now you have a group of close to 700,000 people that are here in the U.S. who are now facing potential deportation removal if they get no relief. Their benefits will expire in March. And that's what the debate is all about right now, just to give you some historical background. In fact, I think that's the White House right now. So they're ready to complain. In any event, so you're hearing in the news about the border wall, which is going to cost billions of dollars, which presumably will prevent people from coming in from Mexico, streaming in from Mexico. And if you've seen the photos recently, what we have as a border wall consists of fencing for the most part. But I think the president is thinking of this huge wall that will act as a true barrier. And will cost a fortune to build, and that's the other part of it. I believe there was a statement made by Kelly just a week or two ago that said the border wall made no sense, but yet it's back on the board. Recent polls show that really 62 to 75% of Americans support the Dreamers. Yet they're being left out in the cold right now because of the tug of war that's going on between the Republicans and Democrats in terms of the funding of Congress. Excuse me. But the fact is, the debate is still going, but the Dreamers are being left out in the cold, so to speak. Unfortunately, we've got to wait and see if a compromise is reached. But what's recently happened is that the president has added to the equation by saying, I want to also change the entire immigration system, and we'll get through that to some degree. He wants to end the diversity visa lottery, the DV lottery, which has been around for a number of years, which allows foreign nationals who participate to come to the U.S. from various countries around the world. And because of the incident on October 31st, a terror incident on the West Side Highway, that has been blown out of context in that the individual involved came to the U.S. as a derivative through the diversity visa lottery. His father had won. He was the child of the winner, was given permanent residence green card status, and that has been seen as a platform as to why all the people who come here on the through the DV lottery are suspect, and the program should be jettisoned for that reason. Again, not very logical, but this is being promoted. So therefore, the immigration debate has been raging to a large degree because of the emotional elements involved. But the fact is that most Americans oppose a border wall. Most Americans support increased immigration. I mean, most Americans recognize that immigrants are the foundation for America. There was an article in the New York Times the other day that said that 1 in 4 healthcare workers are born outside the country. I know the people who took care of my late mother were from the Philippines. Initially, they were from the Caribbean. Try to find an American to care for an aging parent or a sick relative. It's almost impossible today, not just in New York, but throughout the country. The healthcare industry, nursing, our hospitals and nursing homes are staffed largely by nurses who are educated abroad, and it's very challenging for them to get into the U.S. at this time. Yet we face a nursing crisis. Therefore, we're looking at a very complex debate right now. If we look at, again, some of the current events, we're reading about people seeking sanctuary in churches in New Jersey. A professor in the Midwest, originally from Bangladesh, came to the U.S. as a visitor many years ago, has 3 U.S. children, was just arrested by ICE in Detroit the other day. He had been allowed to remain in the U.S. under a special program. And in many cases, the government was willing to let people who were here for many years remain here, and suddenly they're taking away that privilege. And therefore, people are getting apprehended. It's becoming, for foreign nationals, it's a very, very, very scary environment right now. And we're getting calls from people around the country who had, many of them are professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants, who had minor criminal issues many years ago, and they're worried that those past acts will serve as a predicate for them getting potentially deported. They have businesses, families, children who are U.S. citizens. There's a tremendous fear factor going on now of foreign nationals in the United States. Looking at current events, Indonesian Christians in New Jersey have been granted a stay by the federal court there, but ethnic groups around the country are facing challenges. People who came to the U.S. from Vietnam, whose parents were refugees from Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, etc. They never lived in these countries. They're now facing situations where they could be sent back to countries where they never lived. They don't speak the language anymore. And it's creating a real upheaval for people throughout the United States. You've read about the sanctuary city issue, sanctuary state of California, where the state of California has actively opposed ICE intervening. Let me give you a brief picture of what the whole sanctuary concept is all about. When a city or state declares itself sanctuary, it doesn't mean that ICE cannot operate within that jurisdiction. What it means is that they won't actively cooperate with Immigration Customs Enforcement. That's what ICE stands for, Immigration Customs Enforcement. So in other words, the immigration people are still going to run around and do what they think they need to do, which is look for people who are, bad hombres or bad people. And now even in New York, we had a client apprehended in a minor criminal event in Staten Island a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago. He went for a court appearance. At that time, the case was about to against him was going to be dismissed. His lawyer that day was sick, couldn't appear. ICE happened to be there, and they picked this gentleman up. He was his case was about to be resolved in his favor, dismissed. Lawyer not there. ICE said, you have a pending criminal charge. They took him into custody. They haven't set bail yet. He's originally from Pakistan. And this is what's going on. So even though New York City claims to be a sanctuary city, people from ICE are still actively running around looking for foreign nationals, many with even minor criminal issues. We see here ICE is actively attacking the states that declare sanctuary: California, Michigan, New York, New Jersey. Case was reported recently of people in New Jersey seeking sanctuary in churches, also in Massachusetts. There was an article last week of people going for an immigration interview for their green card in Lawrence, Mass, in middle Massachusetts, where I've been to the immigration officer. It's a small immigration office. Going to get their green card, having the green card interview, and because they had overstayed, ICE was basically apprehending them while they were waiting to go for their green card interview. Very extreme. They were following the rules, generally married to American citizens, seeking proper avenues and pathways. ICE didn't care. They just apprehended these people at the immigration building in Lawrence, Mass. Unbelievable. Made the headlines. So, as I said, sanctuary doesn't really provide any kind of immunity. It just means a lack of active cooperation. In the past, many law enforcement authorities were actively cooperating with ICE. If a foreign national was apprehended, they would check with ICE and determine if the person's status was legal or illegal. Now, again, the debate now is skilled immigration. People have argued that the Canadian system is a better system of a point system, but yet many fail to keep in mind that Canada also permits families of immigrants to come in. That's the part of the debate that you don't hear about. In fact, they allow probably more family members than we do, what we call chain immigration. Canada also permits family members. As I've said before, immigrants are the backbone of our country, but now under siege on all fronts. Part of this debate initially started with the wall last year when President Trump was inaugurated, but the debate has spread beyond that to the Buy American, Hire American policy known as BAHA back in April. And this has really created a major upheaval for U.S. immigration. It's a throwback to much earlier times. You know, for those of us who are students of history, it reminds us of the 1920s, 1930s, leading up to World War II, when the United States was very, very protective, Americans want to stay out of European affairs. They saw what was going on with the rise of Nazi Germany and interference in European political matters, and many Americans wanted to stay out of that historically. We're going back to that same philosophy now of America first. Historically, it's just so interesting for those of us who study history to see this retro idea that we should only care about America, the rest of the world is less important. Now the president wants to hold a military-style parade, you probably have heard about, in the same way that they do in France, Russia, China, to show America's military might to the rest of the world. Again, something we haven't seen in many, many years, but it shows where America is going. So if we go back to the Buy American, Hire American, what this means is that jobs should go first to Americans and then foreign nationals, under the theory that foreign nationals are taking jobs away from Americans. But the fact is that many of the jobs that foreign nationals are taking are in highly skilled areas, science, technology, engineering, math, what's known as STEM. And these are not necessarily jobs that Americans are gravitating towards. How many American kids are studying science, technology, engineering, math today? Most American kids want to be rock stars and not necessarily rocket scientists. But yet, there's a huge pool of foreign nationals out there from places like, particularly from India, China, and other countries, England, France, Italy, Spain, that want to come here and truly make America great. I mean, this is what has made America great, and this is what will continue to make America great. And I don't, again, I think it's incorrect to think that blocking these people will help our country. And that's where the debate, I think, encounters problems. Because the fact is that these people are generally not taking jobs away from Americans. They're taking jobs in sectors that Americans are not being allowed in. And the number of foreign nationals getting H-1 visas is not very large. We're talking about 65 to 85,000 people. 65,000 without, with a bachelor's degree from abroad, 20,000 with a master's degree. And as I said, our whole tech industry relies on these people, whether it's Google, Facebook, IBM, you name it. How many companies rely on foreign nationals to take these positions in our country? And people, by the way, from India who come here, and China, it's taking them years to get green cards. There's in many ways, they're tied to these companies for anywhere from 6 to 10 or more years. I mean, they're bound by these companies. I mean, I meet with these people, and they cannot move around. Their ability to change jobs is very, very restricted under these rules. It's extremely challenging for them. And now the spouses of and many of them get the H-1 visa, which I'll go into, and the spouses get H-4. In some cases, the spouses are allowed to work. And there's been a whole issue about taking away work permission for H-4 spouses, and we'll get into that. So again, Buy American, Hire American has changed the whole platform of our current immigration system. And it's made everything much more difficult, much more challenging. Next slide, please. All right. Part of the debate concerns investment, bringing in foreign nationals, and allowing foreign nationals to come in. Certainly the U.S. Ability to bring in foreign nationals who invest heavily in our country, I think, has been a tremendous boon to our country. It's bringing in a huge amount of capital. We all hear about EB-5 and the EB-5 debate. Investment, still a very big area, and has been growing. Now, with EB-5, there are a number of projects out there. EB-5 allows foreign nationals who invest $500,000 in the U.S. to come to this country with their spouse and children under 21. We've just recently extended the current EB-5 deadline, or will be extended until March, after the House and Senate reached their final compromise this week. So the EB-5 limits will remain at $500,000 for pooled investments in what are known as shortage areas. And And this is something we're watching every day. And you've read about problems involving EB-5 investment. We mentioned JP Cure as one of them. That was the ski resort project in northern Vermont on the Canadian border, where a number of foreign nationals invested. And the principals of that project were charged by the SEC with commingling funds and using investor funds for their own use. Unfortunately, one of the many sources of abuse of EB-5 funding. But in fact, there are many, many good projects. We'll go into that briefly in a few minutes. So what drives people to the U.S.? People will say, well, with President Trump being somewhat largely anti-immigration, why is it, or how are foreign nationals drawn to this country? And the fact is that that around the world, things are really very, very problematic. Rising anti-Semitism in France and other countries, what's going on in Poland with the far right in Poland, and many challenges internationally are still making the U.S. a great magnet for foreign nationals. And also the fact people who are involved in startup and tech feel that the U.S. represents the best opportunity for them to get their companies off the ground. We have anti-Semitism also developing in Turkey. There was an article the other day about that. So that's why, with everything that's going on here in this country, the U.S. still is more attractive, or remains attractive, to foreign nationals. We mentioned briefly the EB-5 debate. You've heard about the Kushner family involved in EB-5. They've been promoting several projects, including a project in New Jersey. Jared Kushner's sister went to China to raise EB-5 funding, and happened to mention, you know, my brother's married into the Trump family, hint, hint. Therefore, you should invest in this project because it will be a great project. Received a lot of adverse publicity, but of course a lot of people signed up for that project. They thought if there's a Trump connection, it's a great project, they can't lose. And they actually found a great deal of capital out of this project from foreign investors. Huge amount of capital. I mentioned briefly before about the healthcare industry facing challenges. Again, I'm basically shotgunning a lot of what's going on with U.S. immigration, and then we'll get into some of the specifics. What we're seeing around the country, again, every day, U.S. Justice Department is basically attacking the sanctuary city idea. The head of ICE is saying, you know, we're not going to let anything deter us. We're going to go after these people. Again, you know, what comes out in the press is the MS-13 gang people. Nobody likes MS-13. Let's be real. These are bad hombres, and we would love to get rid of these people. No question. I would never say that we need to give these people any kind of sanctuary here in the U.S. I don't think anybody is in favor of people like that. But unfortunately, the debate is very unbalanced in that way, because they're a very small portion of the immigration debate. But the president and many others have seized on that as an example of immigration gone awry. And it really is not accurate. As I said, nobody likes these people, and we do want to get rid of criminal aliens. The problem is that many people with very, very minor criminal issues are now in danger of being deported. And I'm talking about really, really minor things. People getting into altercations, disorderly conduct, very, very small offenses can lead them to get arrested and detained. So we've seen a huge spike in arrests. During President Trump's first year, in fact, the number of people deported actually was less than under Obama. Most people think of President Obama as being very benign towards immigration. In fact, we were very actively, the Justice Department was very actively going after illegals during Obama's presidency. And the number of people deported was tremendous. And later, of course, he came out with the deferred action, the idea of deferred action and various programs to shield foreign nationals. But in the earlier stages of his presidency, the immigration system was very unforgiving towards foreign nationals. And many were being deported and supported by the White House. Only in the later years did it become more benign. So now we're seeing, again, we're going through a time when it's very tough for foreign nationals and they're very, very scared. I had a fellow come in to see me about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. He came here from Peru, overstayed his visitor visa, has built up a tremendous business in Connecticut, employs a lot of Americans. He makes, it's sort of like a protective coating for fine cars, for Ferraris and all these nice cars. It's a plastic coating that he puts on cars to protect the surface. And he's built up this whole business himself, has all of these people working for him, but he has no legal status. And he's worried, he's got a driver's license, lives and works in Connecticut, but he's worried every day that he could be stopped and apprehended and lose it all. His kids, he's got a wife here, children here, and he just sees it all as being in jeopardy if something should happen to him. I mean, that's the fragile nature of people today from foreign countries who are in our system. They just feel totally fragile, that anything could happen on any given day. And that's what makes this such a pointed debate. I mentioned before about courthouse arrests of immigrants. And again, people who have committed serious crimes are bad hombres and don't deserve to be here. I don't think anybody would say they deserve any kind of sanctuary here. And we all want to see them out. So we're seeing, as I said, a huge spike in arrests and enforcement, and it suddenly has gotten much more intense. Full frontal assault on working visas in the US, unfortunately, as I mentioned before. Various factors have come into play over the last few months. They're making it much harder for companies that want to hire skilled foreign nationals to justify them being here. Immigration has attacked the wage structure under the theory that foreign nationals not being paid commensurate with US workers, which is generally not true, because there are very strict wage guidelines now in place to prevent that from happening. I mentioned here reduction in personnel at US consulates since the change in government last year. Rex Tillerson, over 1,000 State Department people resigned or left. And that's created a big void around the world at various American embassies and consulates, making it much harder for people to get their visas. Many protested the whole Trump program, and it's created difficulties for foreign nationals getting visas to come to the US. I mentioned briefly proposal to terminate work permission for the spouses of H-1s. We have here the number of arrests made by ICE. 140,000 arrests for deportation in fiscal year 2017. 40% increase over last year. It's incredible. Again, various programs in effect. Visa waiver allows people from foreign countries, certain countries, to come to the US for 90-day visits. People from England, France, Japan, Ireland. Now, we're seeing, and many of you heard about this last year, increased security at the airports. There now is a greater ability to search people coming in from abroad, searching cell phones, electronic devices, et cetera. Again, all part of our enhanced security since last year, which started with the presidential freeze last year towards Iran and various other countries. We'll speak about that briefly. Which is now expanded. The travel ban, everybody's been following the various versions of travel ban. Yes?
When you use the term foreign national, it used to be called alien that I know. Is that a legal term? Is that a term of art? Is that an operative term?
Well, Yeah, the question is the term foreign national versus alien. The statutes refer to the term alien, which many of us find to be very strange and very archaic. I'll often use the term foreign national in lieu of alien. I mean, when I think of alien, I think of people, green people from Mars landing, you know, take me to your leader. Although that's technically a term that's used in a lot of the statutes and regulations, or illegal alien, generally speaking, the parlance would use foreign national today, or you know, some people say illegal alien, illegal immigrant. There are many interchangeable, fungible terms that are being used.
Are there illegal foreign nationals and legal foreign nationals?
There are illegal foreign nationals, yeah. Yeah, but technically the statutes do use the term alien, because many of these statutes were drafted 40, 50 years ago and beyond. And that's when the term alien was used more commonly. But it's, you know, again, it's less, it's in the regulations and statutes, but not in common parlance, let's say. For example, if we submit a benefit application, we never will say, we'll call the foreign national an applicant, not an alien. You know, please confer a benefit upon this alien. Will you say foreign national or whatever their visa status may be? And so we know that ICE is considering a hiring surge. Again, President talks about sealing the border, creating a big wall, keeping foreign nationals out. And that's why this New York Times editorial today, a backward view of immigration, is so apropos, because it's a 1920s, 1930s nativistic view of immigration that is taking a lot of control of the debate right now, and it's unfortunate, and it's just so reactionary. Again, it fails to take into account the amazing impact of foreign nationals on our country. You know, last year, all the U.S. Nobel Prize winners, not one of them was born in the United States. They were all foreign born. Doesn't that say something? It gives you an idea of the tremendous impact of foreign nationals on our country. So we're looking at various, you've all been following the travel ban history and legislation, and that's still going through the courts, slowly finding its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And around the country, there have been various lawsuits involved, whether it's California, Maryland, et cetera. And every time these travel bans have come up, the courts have come back and said, you've got to make changes to it. They're too open, too broad. And so they're always being modified. And you know, we have Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Chad, North Korea, of course, Venezuela. How many people do we see from North Korea, honestly? Venezuela, very hard to get out. Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya. We're seeing very few people from these countries. It's interesting how they pick these particular countries, and they leave out Saudi Arabia and other countries which have large populations of people, you know, Islamic people. It's interesting how they pick out these countries. Nobody really quite understands it. And that's why the courts have not sustained it. Yes?
Aren't these countries, how did these countries differ during this administration versus the last? If he added some countries, aren't there additional countries, or are they the same?
The question is, how are these countries different from, you mean under Obama versus what? We had no designations in the past of particular countries. I mean, certainly there was recognition that there were countries that were actively contributing terrorists. We know that most of the 9/11 players were from Saudi Arabia, for example, the vast majority. But they're not on this list.
I understand that, but that's not my question. I thought under the prior administration there were countries that were listed, and then now they're the same countries and a few others. There were countries listed.
There was no, to my knowledge, there was no formal travel ban in effect. until this travel ban, until last January. I think that was the first actual formal travel ban. I'm not aware that there was a prior actual travel ban in effect until January last year. To my knowledge, that was the first formal travel ban.
Was it an informal ban? Because I thought I read that there were countries that were maybe limited numbers, so there was something.
No, I mean,
that was increased.
well, I think there was always a recognition by people in government that certain countries were likely to produce a greater threat, but there was no formal policy in effect that said we're not going to allow either visitors or family members from these countries to come in. And that's that is part of the debate with the travel ban, is that some of these people, for example, you have people here who were born, maybe they're naturalized U.S. citizens now, but they have relatives in these countries who can't come in. So, and so it's created a lot of complications for people who have legal status here, but yet their family cannot come in. So it's extremely challenging. But in terms of how they arrived at these designations, nobody really fully understands it, and that's why the courts have pushed back on it. Every time these cases have gone to the appeals courts, in most instances, they've pushed back on the government, saying you haven't given us a real rational basis why we should have a ban in effect against these particular countries, and why family members should be excluded also. And that's where the government has generally failed throughout most of these lawsuits. I think there was only one federal lawsuit that the government actually prevailed on out of probably 4 that are around the country. Anyway, we're seeing, again, restrictions. President Obama opened up Cuba, and now President Trump wants to close the door to Cuba. Interesting development. U.S. colleges rely very heavily on foreign nationals, foreign students, because they pay full tuition. They don't get the grants and the subsidies that American students get. And it's really affected a lot of schools throughout the country, particularly in the Midwest, that rely very heavily on foreign students who, as I said, pay full tuition. And the enrollments have dropped tremendously. Foreign students are afraid to come here now because they feel that the atmosphere is not welcome, and then after they graduate, they may not be able to get a job here. And this is, again, as I've said before, this is what has made America great. Bringing in talented, bright foreign nationals, come here with great skill sets and are determined to improve their lives. And this is what truly makes America great. And if we see foreign students not coming here, if they're opting to go to other countries, Australia, Canada, China, etc., England, you know, we're losing a tremendous resource that has helped make our country tremendous, in my opinion. This goes back historically to John Kelly. He ordered ICE to portray immigrants as criminals. This is something that's come out recently due to disclosures. We've seen increasing raids around the country. You've read about and heard about 7-Elevens being targeted, various other companies that there was a bakery in Brooklyn or Queens that apparently had foreign nationals working for it. Every once in a while, they'll decide to focus on a particular industry or particular company. In this case, it was 7-Eleven. We had the bakery here in New York. But getting, well, let's go to the next slide. It's getting tougher and tougher to come to the U.S. now. We hear every day from foreign nationals who in the past had no problem coming to the U.S. and now facing increasing difficulties, even as visitors. People are being questioned. The other day, a client of ours, green card holder, who's built up a successful company in the U.S., was returning to the U.S. after 4 months in Italy. He had undergone cancer surgery, coming in through Miami, and they basically said, why don't you give up your green card? He said, the officer at the border said, "You were out 4 months." He said, "Yes, I was going through cancer surgery in Italy. And I have a successful business and home in Miami." The officer said, "Well, you've been out too long." He said, "It was a medical necessity." And he was badgered by the officer, and he was very, very shaken up by this. And yet he has a U.S.-based business, employs U.S. workers, pays taxes, et cetera, and yet he faced this challenge at the airport simply because he was out of the U.S. for 4 months' time. And what this illustrates is that foreign nationals, even those with green cards coming back to the U.S., are being challenged because of the increasing authority given to the Customs Border Protection, CBP, ICE. These various officers feel that they have tremendous power now to do whatever they want because Washington has basically allowed it. And we know this from policy memos that came out and have been disclosed from last year, like the Kelly memo, when making it more challenging for foreign nationals in every way. We're seeing, again, at U.S. consulates abroad, foreign nationals are facing greater challenges getting visas. Companies that want to transfer people into the U.S. on valid visas, their people are not able to get back in, not able to come here. We have a case involving a large American company, thousands of workers here. They were trying to transfer one of their people from London into the U.S. She had a complete application, walks up, goes to the American Embassy in London with her application, goes to the window. Before she could say anything, they said denied. She said, "You haven't even read my application." They said, you don't fit the right formula. We're not granting you the visa. And we're seeing more and more cases of people being rejected and denied. And these are American companies, many with foreign branches, who want to bring skilled people into the U.S., and they're encountering challenges at American embassies. And partly because many of the more senior level people left the State Department, so it's permitted many juniors to rise up, and they're now in positions of authority where they make decisions regarding visa issuance and allowance. And the whole system has run amok in the last year. And we've never seen anything like it, creating tremendous challenges for companies and individuals coming in as visitors. Yes?
You're talking about the change in philosophy of the agents and the immigration and the embassies.
Mm-hmm.
How about the judges? Ultimately, you have to take these people before an immigration judge. Has
Sure.
their attitude changed with the change in administration?
The question is, and it's a great question, has the attitude of immigration judges changed as a result of the political changes, et cetera? Many of the judges now sitting were appointed during the Bush era. The others were appointed earlier are now facing retirement, who were appointed during the Clinton era. We're seeing now that a lot of them who were more benign are now on the verge of retirement. So many of the current judges were Bush appointments, and even during Obama, he ran into a great deal of opposition with appointments, as many of you know, in the judiciary. With the immigration court, you do have tremendous variation in the philosophies of the various judges. In fact, their records are actually online in terms of their approval rejection rates are followed statistically. So if a client has a case before a particular judge, we can track to see whether that judge, what their level of granting versus denial is. And this ranges around the country. And it's very subjective, quite honestly.
I have a question about
Sure.
the upcoming census and the current immigration issues. What effect, and it might not be a short answer, obviously,
Right.
Do you think could play into the census with the current immigration issues?
Right. The issue that is raised is the upcoming census, whether foreign nationals are going to be asked about their status. And there's been a debate about whether that's going to make them vulnerable to potential deportation removal, and which obviously, in my view, it would. And that's why many of them may not participate in the upcoming census out of fear that they'll be caught up in the dragnet by disclosing their status as being non-American. And that's a debate that's going on right now, actually, so it's a great question. And let's see. We're talking about various acts of legislation that are coming up every week there are new acts of legislation being raised in Congress, being generated. One of them is the RAISE Act, which President Trump has endorsed, which is Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas and David Perdue of Georgia introduced a bill to allow a point-based system in the U.S. similar to Canada. Has not been very popularly received. President Trump has endorsed it because he thinks the Canadian system is a superior system. Not seeing the fact that the Canadian system also allows what we call chain immigration, family members, et cetera, again, selectively looking at that system. There is not a lot of public support for the RAISE Act, so right now it's pretty much on the back burner. I mentioned briefly the deferred action, the Dreamers, and again, by definition, what we talked about before is they're at the center of the debate right now. And there are various legislative acts that have been introduced in Congress to grant recognition to the Dreamers. But none of them have caught enough traction yet to go very far, unfortunately. And I've summarized a few of them here. And hopefully that will change. Each one of these potential congressional acts gets some degree of traction, but we're waiting for some compromise to be reached. And these would all be replacement bills for the DACA. Yes?
Has the immigration bar decided in any way to propose a model immigration law like they've done in many other bars? Because I don't believe that anybody in Congress or presidents know really what the issues are properly. And the idea is that the examples you've given me, the people that are in business that deserve to be here, great foreign nationals that are working in science and engineering, and I think Congress has substituted an irrational thing like a lottery because they don't want to get down to work and really make a reasonable standard on which to make these decisions that make sense to everybody. And we all agree what makes sense. We want to be protected from the riffraff not coming in and allow people who have dreams and great ambitions for all of us to be allowed to work here. But Congress isn't doing it. And if the current administration did anything, maybe they did a favor to all these immigrants because they're forcing Congress now to give them a procedure by which they can become citizens, by which they can become legal. We haven't had that, and it's not Bush, and it's not Obama, and it's not Trump. It's the Congress. This falls squarely on Congress.
Well,
so has the immigration bar considered making a model immigration law to present to Congress that would make sense? Because you guys are the ones that know how to do it.
The question is, has the immigration bar raised or come out with a model immigration law similar to a model tort law or in other fields of law? And I think partly it's because the immigration system is so diverse and so complex that nobody has come up with a step-by-step formula as to how we should amend the system. Essentially, it's a cobbled system that goes back historically in terms of work visas. Our allocations were developed in 1976. The current visa allocations now came into effect in 1976, effective January 1st, 1977, essentially. It's an old system now. The numerical allocations in terms of family members, accompanying family members, relatives, et cetera, employment-based preferences, various country allocations, all were developed in 1976.
But this system belongs to Congress, not to the administration,
correct.
Whoever the president.
Yeah, Congress made the last move on immigration. Since 1976, there's been no congressional act other than the amnesty under Reagan. That was the last congressional act permitting foreign nationals to come here, just the amnesty bill. But unfortunately, there's been no comprehensive immigration reform act that I'm aware of that the Immigration Bar has fully advocated. Partly, I think, because it's such a huge, diverse area in terms of legal immigration. You have family immigration. You have business immigration. You have refugee issues. It's just very diverse, and it's very hard to define. And I think that's why, essentially what they do is they cobble together different things from time to time. So they don't address the entire issue as they did back in 1976, let's say. And it would be nice if somebody tackled the complex global issue on immigration. Anyway, we're looking at various DACA replacement bills, and again, the debate is still raging. And meanwhile, the dreamers are still out in the cold. These kids are really facing a tremendous problem. I mean, the ability to obtain work permission, to extend their work permission is being heavily compromised. We're talking about almost 700,000 people. I mean, it's a huge number of people. And they came here, many came here at a very young age, and they've been working, going to school. They've become active tax-paying members of our society, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and now they're facing the uncertainty of what's going to happen to their immigration status. And that's what we're looking at right now. Now, in terms of, and we're following this very closely. As I said, every day events unroll regarding this. We have various programs that allow foreign nationals to come here, the J-1 visa, exchange visitors. And again, many of these programs are now being closely watched. Many businesses bring in kids here for summer employment in various resort areas. They come in on special visas such as the J-1, au pairs. A lot of the country clubs, restaurants, et cetera, rely during the summer, and resort areas rely on these people to come in and help them during the summer months. As many of you know, if you go up to Cape Cod, if you go to the Hamptons, you see a huge number of foreign kids who come in every year, every summer. They're given limited visas to work here, to live and work here. We're going to go into the EB-5 program, which is a real hot topic in U.S. immigration. And EB-5 is very, very important, I think. It's been an important part of New York City real estate, for example. It allows foreign nationals, I mentioned briefly before, to come to the U.S. if they invest $500,000 in a real estate project or enterprise. Right now, the level is $500,000 in a targeted area, which most of New York is considered what's called a targeted area, TEA. Now, Congress is talking about increasing those numbers, but so far the numbers are remaining the same. And it's been a big boon for a lot of real estate projects throughout New York. Related Hudson Yards, we'll talk about it, has relied very heavily on foreign investment. Even though it's only 25% of the overall project cost, it's still a tremendous boon for the project. And we're looking at a number of, over 900 projects have been approved for EB-5, huge number, and it's increased dramatically just in the last few years. When EB-5 was unveiled a number of years ago, it really did not get off the ground for many years. Then, just in the last few years, developers have recognized the ability to bring in foreign capital at cheaper rates than institutional financing. So it's really allowed developers to take advantage of a great market. But of course, with that, there's a tremendous risk in terms of the nature of the project, and we'll talk about that. Foreign nationals have to be very concerned that they get into a project that's properly structured and monitored. J-Peak, for example, imploded just last year. In fact, I know lawyers who had clients that happened to be from China get into J-Peak a year ago, and at the time when J-Peak started to implode, and then they sued to get their money back. because they knew they weren't going to get their green cards. And we always say you don't want to be the first in or the last in any EB-5 project because of the risks involved. So we, as immigration lawyers, we're often asked to evaluate certain projects. We're not accountants. You know, our input is limited. We will often tell foreign nationals you really need to speak to a financial advisor to look at the project very carefully. We certainly don't want to be on the hook. We'll never recommend one project, just one project. We'll recommend, or if people do ask us for a recommendation, we'll recommend multiple projects. A number of projects have been shut down by the government because of fraud. There have been a number of cases reported of projects that have gone down due to mismanagement, taking foreign funds, that sort of thing, especially affecting nationals of China. Chinese nationals make up the greatest number of people using EB-5. And Russia follows distantly. Now India is starting to get into the EB-5 picture. The greatest challenge for foreign nationals coming or who want to go into EB-5 is showing the source of their funds. Immigration will go back up to 10 years or more to ask, where did that money come from? Was it gifted? Was it based on the sale of real estate back in your home country? What is the source of the funding? And that's where the debate really centers for EB-5 investment. And a number of projects we'll talk about here include, as I mentioned, the related projects, Staten Island Ferris Wheel, the John Malowski Bank Building, projects around the whole country are reliant and dependent on EB-5 financing. Miami, LA, Chicago, Detroit, etc. I mentioned briefly the J. Peak litigation, and the fact is a number of people did get their green cards out of J. Peak. Not everybody, but many. And that's why in those cases the developers said we did give a benefit to the foreign nationals, so they did get their money's worth. However, they're not getting their money back. Biggest issue for foreign nationals in the EB-5 debate is, will I get my money back? They don't see the green card as just a $500,000 investment. They want to know they're going to get their principal back plus a small amount of interest. In most of these EB-5 projects, the amount of interest that the foreign national gets is really very, very minor. It's about a point to a point and a half. Plus they pay an administrative fee above the $500,000. Those administrative fees can run $30,000 to $50,000, $60,000 above the $500,000. And to the developers, they're saying, well, you're getting a green card for that money. But of course, every foreign national wants their principal and a degree of interest back. It's not enough that they just get the green card. They want to see the money. That's why there have been a number of issues involving fraudulent EB-5 schemes. There was one in Chicago, a developer was featured, an article on that was featured about the scam in Chicago last year. And so foreign nationals have to be very careful. Many EB-5 projects have agents situated in China, in Beijing, Shanghai, et cetera, trying to solicit foreign funds, especially from China. As I said, the greatest number of EB-5 investors have come from China. But that also opens the floodgate to a lot of fraud involving Chinese nationals. There was recently an EB-5 project shut down in California because of fraud committed against Chinese nationals. And you certainly, you don't want your client to be the person who is defrauded of $500,000. Somebody contacted me last year, a Korean national, and they lost their $500,000 in a project that didn't get off the ground. And they were not very happy about it, and they had to file a lawsuit in federal court to try to get their money back, which of course is expensive, but they never got the benefit that they bargained for through the EB-5. So there are a lot of cases where people are placed in a very fragile position when they get involved in EB-5. So you've got to be very, very cautious as a practitioner or a real estate advisor. As I said, we often tell clients, speak to a financial person, an accountant, an appraiser, somebody who can look at a project. Now, not all projects need to be large developments like Related's Hudson Yards. There are many smaller projects that can be funded with EB5 capital. You can have mini projects involving maybe 2 investors that'll create 10 jobs, $500,000 each. Each investor has to create 10 jobs throughout the period of the investment. So we've seen small projects, we've seen large projects. Most EB5 projects seem to take on the larger capacity that we hear about. We mentioned briefly the Staten Island Ferris wheel. Now there are other visas that allow for investment in the US. The E1, E2 investment visa, for example, allows foreign nationals from certain countries to set up US-based businesses based on either trade or investment. There's a large number of countries that allow foreign nationals to do this, except for Russia, India, and China are not allowed to use the E1, E2 investment program because they don't have treaties with the US, unfortunately. But England, France, Germany, Pakistan, many countries, Japan, allow foreign nationals. Israel is approved for the E1 trade. Soon it has been approved for E2 investment, but the Israeli government hasn't finalized the E2 implementation yet. We're waiting for that. That's been going on. President Obama approved that almost 3 years ago. But politically, it's been blocked in Israel because they probably don't want money leaving Israel. They don't want investment capital leaving Israel coming to the US. But at some point, it hopefully will be approved. And again, it allows a foreign national to set up any type of business in the US. You name it. It could be a restaurant, it could be manufacturing, it could be startup tech. We're seeing, again, a lot of tech coming to the US. A lot of foreign nationals see the US as the land of tech opportunity. They know that they have a greater chance of meeting potential investors in this country. And therefore, America beckons for a lot of foreign nationals. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of people in artificial intelligence and various tech startups from Italy, China, India, everywhere, who want to get involved in U.S. technology. Other visas that we come across involve L1 transfers. This means a company abroad sends a foreign national who's worked for them for at least a year in an executive, managerial, or special capacity. So the idea is that a company, let's say IBM England, can send a worker into the US who's worked for them for at least a year. We're seeing recently pushback by the American embassies for some reason on transfers and even immigration. They're making it more challenging now for companies to transfer their personnel. Why, we don't really understand that. Again, it probably relates back to this Buy America, Hire America idea that we should restrict and close the door. And it's really creating burdens for American companies who want to bring in foreign nationals. And they're very frustrated by that. And that's why during the recent Trump anti-immigration phase, the entire tech industry has come out in support of increasing visas, not restricting visas, H-1 working visas. And the H-1 is the basic working visa, and we'll talk about that momentarily. And the H-1 visa has been under attack. Again, through the Buy American, Hire American policy. The H-1B is your basic working visa. And it gets a lot of airtime, a lot of play. But it really, the numbers are really down from what they were. There was a time when there was no limit on the H-1s, and then there was a 300,000 limit. That was the first limit. Excuse me. And now we're down to really 65 to 85,000. 65,000 bachelor's level, 85,000, including the 20,000 allocated for the masters, having a U.S. master's. And plus Singapore and Chile. And 6,800 visas are set aside for Singapore and Chile. And that's political. That's just based on political issues. H-1 visas run, it's a race that starts April 1st. Now, if the foreign national is lucky enough to make it in, there have been lotteries every year because the number of applicants has far exceeded the number of available visas. So immigration conducts a lottery every spring, and not everybody gets in. 2 years ago, only half. 2 years ago, 30% got in. Last year it was 52%, 50% or so. We're expecting it to be a little higher this year because companies are a little more nervous about hiring foreign nationals. They feel, again, they're being challenged by the government in terms of the wage being offered the foreign national, the job description, various challenges they're facing. And it's made our job as lawyers much, much harder. I should say parenthetically, having been in the field for a long time, there was a time when immigration was definitely much easier. The whole mechanism was much easier. In the last 6 months or a year or so, it's become much more challenging because immigration is challenging every aspect of the system, making it more challenging for U.S. companies to hire foreign workers for a variety of reasons. Made our job much tougher. And therefore, the law firm model has really changed, we've seen in the last 6 months to a year. From a paralegal-driven model, now we have to rely more heavily on skilled attorneys, and not junior-level people, but very highly trained, skilled attorneys. And it's really shifted the entire immigration legal model from what it was before, because the government is making it so much harder and challenging for us. The H-1B visas can be for up to 3 years. It can be extended beyond. During that time, most people try to apply for a green card. And the spouse of the H-1 is known as the H-4. And at a certain point, they may be eligible to work, but that's being challenged now. Again, it's a lottery. That begins on April 1st, but the foreign national can't work until October 1st. And therefore, there's a challenge right there because the company that decides they want the foreign national cannot employ them actually until October 1. And so that makes it more challenging for the American company that needs this particular worker. It's not easy. But yet America still beckons for many foreign nationals. Every day we're meeting people from many countries throughout the world who are going to school here but want to remain here because they still feel with everything that's going on in Washington, with the whirlwind and the cyclone, that America still represents the future in terms of stability. It may not seem very stable to us right now, but compared to the rest of the world, it is somewhat stable. China and India account for 82% of the H-1 visas. Incredible, right? You can see the breakdown here. There's a very, India far exceeds. And again, tech industry, many of these people are in the tech industry.
What other industries are they in? What other industries are they in?
Besides tech?
Hospitality?
I would say hospitality to a degree, yeah. Although hospitality uses a lot of temporary people. They rotate people because we work with a lot of hotels around the country. But I would say by far the tech industry is, I mean, when you look at, and I would say also engineering, a lot of companies involved in engineering, chemicals also very big. Dow Chemical, all of these companies hire foreign nationals. We'll briefly go through and again, the H-1B visa is the working horse, the basic, it's the mechanism for most people who come here to get a green card. They'll first go on an H-1 visa because they come here on the H-1B visa, then they get sponsored by the company by showing there's a shortage of American workers, and they do that through advertising to show why they can hire that foreign worker on a permanent basis. And that's called labor certification, and that's a process that goes through the Labor Department. So typically the foreign national will come here as a student. They will then get what's called optional practical training, or OPT, after they finish studies that allows them internship to live and work here. And from there they'll typically go to an H-1. And from the H-1 they'll lead into a green card. That's your typical progression for foreign nationals. Again, facing many challenges right now. Other prominent visas are the H-2B visa. Mark, how much time, are we breaking or just going?
How much time do we need? Keep on going.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Everybody entertained? All right, good. H-2B visa, used by, I mentioned this briefly, used by farms, restaurants, hotels. Mar-a-Lago, big H-2B visa user. Many of you may remember during the presidential debate, Donald Trump was attacked on this issue, Mar-a-Lago. And he said, I'm just using the system. He said, I'm allowed to do this. You may recall during the debates. And they do.
Taxes.
Huh?
Like taxes.
Right, right. But Trump hotels, they all rely on many foreign nationals, as we know. But the H-2B visa is really the backbone of our agricultural system. I don't know if you saw a year ago during Anthony Bourdain's at the start of his season involving his TV show, he was interviewing farmers and restaurant owners in California a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. And they all said that their whole industry depends on foreign nationals working in the fields, providing the fruits and vegetables for the restaurants. And we see this throughout the country. Orchards in New York, upper New York State, and throughout New York, in every part of the United States, rely on H-2B workers. Many people who harvest the apples in New York State come from Jamaica and the Caribbean. They come here seasonally. They're seasonal workers. And they staff the country clubs in Florida. If you have friends and family down in Florida, all of the country clubs, and in New York too, they're staffed by H-2B workers from abroad. They come here on temporary visas, and then they leave. And they're seasonal workers, essentially. This is one of the few areas of immigration that they're looking to increase the number of seasonal workers. But to hire a seasonal worker, a U.S. business has to really go through a lot of hurdles to show that they've tried to find American workers, they've recruited. We have to run ads in the newspaper. They have to show that they've attempted to recruit U.S. workers and been unsuccessful. And they jump through a lot of hoops. And then they file an application both through the Labor Department and then to the Immigration Service, showing that they've made these attempts to hire U.S. workers but have been unsuccessful. And it's very challenging and takes time. Not easy. Now, there have been potential increases in H-2 visas. Now, immigration options. Many of you heard about the entrepreneur program that President Obama had proposed and President Trump put on ice, so to speak. It was revived again, but now it's not really getting off the ground yet. We're waiting for it to happen. It's going to provide some sort of permission for foreign nationals to come to the U.S. to start up businesses. It's not actually a visa. It's a form of what they call parole. It's a quasi-visa. The international entrepreneur. As I indicate here, applications, they will start accepting them hopefully soon. And again, this program was put into play by President Obama, but President Trump decided not to let it start. Now it's recently gotten a green light. Potential entrepreneurs come to the U.S., bring their families by investing in a U.S. business. 5 years for up to 5 years. Investment of $375,000. Great idea. Bring in foreign capital. That's what we need to do.
How is that different than the EB-5, where you can, I think the number there was $1 million, you can start your own?
Even $500,000. Great question. The question is, how does the entrepreneur visa program differ from the EB-5? Terrific question. It differs in one major way. The EB-5 leads to a green card. EB-5 is a pathway to a green card. The entrepreneur is a temporary visa of sorts. It's a permit to come in. Of course, people would rather do the EB-5.
So what's the difference?
It's faster. Let me explain. There's a limited number of people who can come in each year on EB-5. That's why. And with the entrepreneur, it'll be a much faster way to get people in versus the EB-5, which is a green card, so it's a longer program, longer platform. The entrepreneur visa will be done within a matter of weeks, so it's a fast pathway for foreign nationals. Now, of course, they could use that entrepreneur visa as a platform towards EB-5. The same thing as we often counsel people who come on the E2 investment visa. We can often convert a family business into EB-5 if they hire additional people. If they hire 10 new workers, they can create a platform using, let's say, an E2 investment into an EB-5 green card. And that's one of the things we do as immigration lawyers, is try to come up with creative solutions for foreign nationals who both want to live and work here and create businesses and platforms that will enable them to stay here on a permanent basis, not just temporary. Yes?
Is it possible for any foreign national to enter the United States without a visa?
Well, I mean, they come in illegally.
Legally without a visa?
Without a visa? No. No.
So that differentiates between an illegal and a legal?
Well, even Canadians are coming in as tourists.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have to go to the American Embassy and get a visa. They're given the authorization to come into the U.S. Without actually needing a visa stamp. And that's not likely to change. Although Canadian visitors are challenged more and more because they have to prove they're not coming here to work. So many young Canadians are often challenged by the authorities at port of entry. What's the purpose of your stay? You know, they may say, I'm coming to the U.S. to shop at stores across the border, that sort of thing. But they still have to prove that they have an intent to return. That's the basis for any visitor coming to the U.S. You must establish that you're coming to the U.S. temporarily and intend to go back to the home country.
Would it be fair to say that an illegal entry is defined by an entry that comes in without the knowledge of the government, without the INS knowledge? Would that be fair?
I think the question is it fair for people to come into the U.S.?
Is it fair to define an illegal immigrant
Okay.
as somebody who comes in
Now I understand the
without
question.
notifying the United States government?
Okay. I think the question is, how do you define an illegal immigrant? You have two ways to define. That's a great question, actually. You have two ways to define an illegal immigrant. One is somebody who comes into the U.S. without authorization across the border, without a proper visa. The other is somebody who comes to the U.S. with a proper visa, but overstays that visa. For example, many of the people here have overstayed their tourist visas who are in the U.S. They've remained beyond their authorized time. We have students who stay beyond the time that they're allocated as students, even temporary workers who have either been laid off, lost their jobs, for a variety of reasons have remained in the U.S. Now, bear in mind, we haven't gotten into the whole political asylum issue because that opens up a whole other door of people who are claiming persecution here. Remember, that's another avenue for a lot of people. Very challenging avenue, though, for people. They must claim that they're the victims of persecution, and it's a can be a very challenging burden of proof to prove that they can't go back to the foreign country, because they must prove that they're individually victims, not just necessarily part of a large, in some cases, a large group. They have to show individual fear of persecution, why they can't go back to the home country. And this is why the immigration debate is so extensive, just from what you've said. Because there are many people who have come here and overstayed and now want to become legal. For many people who want to become legal, the easiest route is to marry an American citizen, as many of you have heard. And it's still the most popular route for foreign nationals. But it's not as easy as it was. Immigration is getting much smarter in terms of fraud detection and that sort of thing. And for people who marry an American citizen, they only get a 2-year temporary green card. They then have to prove, when the 2 years are about up, that marriage is bona fide and that they're still together, unless they can show either they were a battered spouse or that for whatever reason the marriage couldn't sustain itself through no fault of theirs. In other words, they have to prove the bona fides of that marriage. So it's not all that easy. And then later they can apply for citizenship within 3 years of marriage to an American citizen, or 5 years if they have a green card. Yes? Question?
I know of some professionals who come here, like doctors, and they marry to American citizens, but they don't go that route. It's suggested that as a way, not knowing the specifics makes no sense, but they go through the professional route. Why would they do that?
Okay. There's some, well, the question is, there are foreign physicians coming here to get training in America. Many of them, many foreign physicians come here on what are called J-1 exchange visas, and they have a restriction that says that they have to return to their home country for 2 years and before they can live here and work here. So even if they marry an American, they may be subject to that restriction. So it's unless they get a special waiver. And those waivers can be very challenging to get. In many cases, they have to show either hardship, inability to return to the home country because of persecution issues, or alternatively, that they've worked in a shortage area American health facility. Shortage areas are defined as areas such as even actually parts of New York State where there's a large number where the need for physicians is much greater. For example, Upper New York State, even parts of Brooklyn, Queens, and Upper Manhattan would qualify in certain shortage areas. These are all based on census tracts that are done by the U.S. Census Bureau, showing large numbers of or need for foreign physicians.
So marrying an American wouldn't.
Well, in some cases, if they don't have the J-1 visa, they would be exempt. But with the J-1 visa, marriage to an American won't automatically get them out of that 2-year restriction. Again, one of the many nuances in immigration that we deal with every day. It's just such a multifaceted field. The number of challenges is incredible. Somebody called me yesterday. This is an interesting case. A fellow comes here from India. In 2001, he missed a benefit that was established a year before. He was about a year or two late. So he's been in the U.S. for a number of years. He goes to a lawyer in 2001, 2002, and they say, we'll file a case for you, not telling him that the filing is probably going to be worthless. He spends thousands of dollars on this filing. Meanwhile, in the interim, he meets somebody from India who comes to the U.S. as a visitor, later changes to student, and then gets an H-1 visa, so she's probably working. He's not here legally. They have a 4-year-old child born here. He called me yesterday with his wife. She's working for a very large company that's the U.S. branch of a Netherlands tech company, I believe. And so she's at the start of her H-1 visa. She'd gone from visitor to student, now to H-1. He's here illegally. And what makes this very interesting is that he invested thousands of dollars in a family with his uncles in a restaurant, in restaurant 1, that apparently didn't do so well. Then they asked him for more money. He invested in a second restaurant. Then they basically said, you have no legitimate interest because you're not legal. They didn't recognize his interest. Get this. So they basically cheated him out of his thousands of dollars. He told me he hired a lawyer in New Jersey to try and get some of his money back, but that's going to be an uphill battle. But it shows you the fragile nature of being a foreign national here without status. As I mentioned before about the car guy in Connecticut, this guy also, hardworking guy, he's a chef working for another restaurant now. But meanwhile, he's out thousands of dollars that he invested with relatives who told him they would protect his money and his interest, but then later said, what money, what interest? And foreign nationals are frequently placed in that unenviable position where they're vulnerable. And this is very common. I've heard many stories of people coming from other countries that have invested with friends and family. They buy houses in the names of relatives. Going back to January last year, when President Trump came in, I had people come in to see me who had been here many years. They had purchased properties, but because of their illegal status, the properties were put in the names of friends and family. And they were concerned that if they were deported, how would they be able to get their money back or their property? I mean, these are questions that we're faced with as immigration practitioners. So meanwhile, they've put the title in the name of friends and family, not in their names because they weren't legal. Very challenging. And foreign nationals are facing these issues now that have developed these successful businesses. We have a number of cases involving foreign nationals that have developed very successful businesses here, but for whatever reason they're not legal, and they can be kicked out of the country at any time. And yet they employ many Americans. They pay taxes, but yet they have nothing to show for it because there's no amnesty right now. Yes?
Do they have a remedy through the EB-5 application when they have more than $500,000 or $1 million?
Yeah, great question. Whether somebody who is here can avail themselves of the EB-5 green card investment regardless of their immigration status. And unfortunately, if they're not currently in status, they can't take advantage of EB-5. Well, they have to have legal status. I mean, EB-5 is great for people who are legal or people who are abroad, but people who are here illegally can't take advantage of EB-5.
So, I guess the second part of my question is, what's the timing for the investment for an EB-5? In other words, suppose a person was here and built up a business that's worth $5 million today. Can they run home, make an application on an EB-5 and say, there's my investment?
Not necessarily. I mean, it would be very challenging to do that. They would basically have to cover their tracks.
Does the money have to be put in after the EB-5?
No, the money is put in the beginning. The EB-5 is based on that large investment in the U.S., in a U.S. enterprise. So the question is, and the question arises...
The shareholder,
excuse me.
The owner of the company is sitting in Queens. I have a $5 million company.
Well, you know, for people who come into the U.S., you should know, everybody who comes into the U.S. now comes in on what's called a machine-readable passport, where they're checked in. And when they depart, they're checked out. So we have an electronic system in place. We required all foreign countries to put chips in their passports so that everybody who comes in is entered in the database. We now have very extensive, or I should say, CBP, Customs Border Protection, has very extensive databases now that they know when people arrive. Of course, there are many people who don't leave. But if they do leave, they're then registered when they depart. So then the system would show that they've overstayed. And how that impacts foreign nationals is they could be subject to certain bars, what are called the 3- and 10-year bars. In other words, if they overstay 180 days or more, they can be subject to a 3-year bar. Beyond that, they could be subject to a 10-year bar to getting a green card or coming back to the U.S. on a visa. And these bars are very, very strict. And now they're more easily enforced because the passports are now electronic, so that the embassy or immigration will know if somebody has overstayed unless they can somehow sneak out of the U.S., which is very challenging.
Without being political, it's not a political question. What is wrong with enforcing the law? Say if a person is here illegally, they're denied all these rights and remedies. What's wrong with that?
The question is, what's wrong with sending back somebody who's gone through the system, been rejected, they've taken advantage of all the remedies, appeals, etc. What's wrong with sending them back? And that's the part of the central issue of the debate. Should they still have a right to be here? I mean, I'm speaking apolitically. I'm not a registered, I'm independent, actually. I'm not registered with either party. I'm speaking as someone who looks at immigration and tries to look at it from all sides in terms of the debate. And I would certainly never recommend that people who have committed criminal acts be allowed to remain here, for sure. There are other cases where people, and you'll read about these cases where people have come here illegally, overstayed, but then had gotten married to U.S. citizens or had children born here, which is a different issue. There are cases now that we've seen involving people coming here from Central America claiming or applying for political asylum from countries like El Salvador, Central American countries who've gone through the system, their appeals have been denied, and now they're forced to go back, which leads to your question, should they be allowed to remain here? They've exhausted their appeals. Should we allow them to remain here? And that goes right to the core of your question. And many Americans say no. They've gone through the system. System says, you've exhausted it. Your asylum has not been established. And there are many cases like that. And I recognize that. I mean, they've availed themselves of the system, and it hasn't worked. And should they be allowed to remain here? It's a political and a human debate.
So the DACA children,
Mm-hmm.
they're illegally, are they not?
They came here illegally.
Well, they were children.
Right, but that's part of the debate. You know, President Trump refers to them as the kids.
2 years old, or in the uterus, how can it be illegal? They don't control them.
No, if they were born here, they're U.S. citizens by birth. America is one of the countries that recognizes U.S. citizenship by birth. Not all countries do, but the U.S. does. You've heard of the people coming here to have babies. There's a big market in that. There was just an article on that the other day in Miami, Russian women coming here to have babies. I don't know if you caught that in the newspaper. They're called anchor children, anchor babies. There are companies now that encourage foreign nationals to come here to give birth to U.S. citizens so that they can later, when the child is 21, petition for that parent as the parent of a U.S. child, U.S. citizen. These are called anchor babies. And there's a large business in California, New York, and in Florida that takes advantage of that.
This question may be ill timed, it should have been raised an hour ago. But if a child is brought here, you're saying if they're brought here as a child and not U.S. citizens, they have no rights.
If they're brought here as a child, correct. They're not automatic
If
citizens.
they're born here, they have rights.
If they're born here under U.S. law, they're automatic citizens. As I said, not every country recognizes that rule of law. Fortunately, the U.S. does. I mean, there are people here who would like to change that. There have been debates about whether we should change that policy, but that's as American as the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that's American jurisprudence. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Now, people, we didn't get into naturalization, but people, I mentioned briefly, people who have green cards can apply for naturalization generally after 5 years. If they married an American and they're still together, they can apply for citizenship within 3 years, but they still have to prove that they're still with that U.S. citizen partner. Naturalization, of course, is the ultimate goal. It's very hard to take away citizenship unless there's been some sort of fraud. Somebody hasn't or has hidden the fact that they were a member of a terrorist group or the Nazi Party or something like that. Occasionally you'll hear about people who are denaturalized. They participated in the Bosnian War. There was a case recently, they failed to mention that they were involved in war crimes and atrocities. It's very hard to denaturalize someone, but occasionally it does happen. That naturalization is a process whereby the foreign national has to demonstrate that they've been in the U.S. physically for 2.5 out of 5 years. They've paid taxes, shown good moral character. I should add that the number of criminal offenses that result in people getting kicked out is really quite expansive, and even very minor crimes can result in people with green card holders being deported. The threshold for crimes involving fraud is very low. You may have heard about the Ravi Ragbir case. Ravi Ragbir had a green card, but he had been convicted of a fraud charge a number of years ago. Father of U.S. kids is being deported, being sent back. Yes?
You have a domestic, gets a green card, works off the books, is not paying taxes at the portable offense.
Has a green card, you said.
Has a green card, works as a domestic, works off the books.
Okay. The question is can somebody with a green card who is working off the books, not paying taxes, are they subject to deportation? If the government were to charge them with any kind of tax fraud, it is possible they could lose their green card. I haven't seen that because generally the government will give them an opportunity to pay their taxes, back taxes and interest and penalties. I mean, we do see that. But they generally, I've never seen anybody deported for failure to pay taxes. But I have seen people not get citizenship for either failure to pay taxes or failure to pay child support or spousal support. Yes?
What's the liability for
Excuse me.
American citizens and professionals that hire home workers that are not legally present in the United States? In other words, illegal aliens that work
Okay, that's
as babysitters, housekeepers. And
great question. What's the extent of liabilities for Americans who hire illegals? Yes, there are laws on the books that discourage that and create a range of penalties and fines generally directed towards companies, not individuals. U.S. government has been targeting companies that are hiring illegals rather than individuals. And we've defended companies that have hired people. So we're not finding, individuals are generally not being prosecuted for that, doing that. But I will say, I have talked to people who are running for office or getting federal appointments, judgeships, et cetera, who have employed nannies illegally, who were very concerned that that would affect their appointment, and in the past it had.
The Zoe case.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little more relaxed now than it was a few years ago, than Zoe Baird. But I did have somebody, actually a rabbi from Westchester, who was appointed to a presidential commission. She'd employed an illegal nanny. She was concerned that that would affect her ability to sit on this presidential commission under Obama. And what they ended up paying the back taxes for the nanny. And that's usually what happens. They'll pay the back taxes. And I mean, very few people are prosecuted for doing that. Again, the thrust of immigration policy is on companies that hire illegals. And you've read about a number of American companies that have hired illegals in their factories. The largest kosher meatpacking plant in Rebeshkin, exactly. And I knew the family. That was a very sad case. They were targeted on that case. But there are many other instances of American companies that have been targeted for hiring illegals and face very strict penalties. What we do is when we represent companies, there's a strict liability really for that kind of thing. It's very hard to get around it. The best we can generally do is get penalty reductions. You're not generally going to win in court when the government usually has a huge amount of evidence against the company for violations. Many of these violations are based on hiring illegals or improper documents, I-9 forms not properly filled out and retained. So companies have to be really careful when you hire somebody within 3 days of hire that the foreign national fills out an I-9 form and shows proof that they have the ability to work in the U.S. Again, a whole other area that I unfortunately didn't have time to get into. Yes?
I mean, this is a practical question for advising clients, so I'm asking this now. Before I went to law school, I had my own manufacturing company. We did W-4s and I-9s, and I did my payroll tax, and I would send it in. And sometimes within a month or two, I would get notice from the IRS that this Social Security number is no good or it doesn't match this person.
Sure.
And I would run down to the factory and say, I'm sorry, and you know, the person would have to leave. But between that time, you have 30, 60, 90 days until you get notice from the government that the payroll tax you're sending in under that name and that Social Security number isn't matching up somewhere. I assume that that's not a problem. It's a bad assumption, but
the gentleman raises a very good question. What happens when an employer has been employing a foreign national who is furnished or provided a Social Security number that is presumably valid, we assume is valid. Later, it turns out you get a letter from Social Security, it's called a mismatch letter, saying that there's no record with Social Security regarding that particular Social Security number. What is the employer's obligation when that happens? And the correct answer is you're supposed to terminate the foreign national. And there are many cases like that. Many companies don't terminate the foreign nationals, and then they run the risk of later running into a problem. So it becomes a slippery slope for companies that employ people when they do discover that the social is improper, incorrect. You've got to be very careful with that. The fines can be very heavy. Yes?
What happens to the money that the employer remits?
That's a very good question. The question is, what happens to the money that's placed into Social Security for an improper number? The employee never gets that. The employee never gets that benefit, by the way. Even if they later become legal, because it was based on an improper number. It's a very interesting question, because they could have been paying in for many years, but to my knowledge, they don't get that benefit because it was based on an improper number. And therefore, for the foreign national, it is very treacherous getting involved in that. But yet it goes on. I mean, there's a whole market from what we hear in terms of counterfeit green cards, social security numbers, etc. But we don't want to know about that.
Does it go for a particular person?
I'm sorry?
So the government has it, and it's not.
Government keeps the funds, yeah. But yet they claim they're running out of money for Social Security. I don't know.
And the employer has to hire a lawyer and deal with that.
I've never seen anybody recover those funds from the government in all the years I'm doing. This is a very interesting question. Excuse me. Any other questions? You've been a great crowd, great audience.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.